Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar to celebrate the World Social Justice. I'll ask that everybody turn off their camera and the microphone for now until it's time and we have the discussion. So for now, I would like to invite the speakers for today. That will be Sven Jentoft and Milena Restriever, and then myself, Ratana Chinpakdi. So Sven, if you'd like to put on your camera, that would be great. Excellent. So the three of us are here, very happy, of course, to present to you the papers the papers that we have been working on and have just been released. And we cannot be more happy to use this event to celebrate, like I said, the World Day of Social Justice, to really talk about blue justice for small-scale fisheries. We titled the webinar, Language is Power, How to Talk about and act on blue justice for small-scale fisheries. So this title would capture the three presentations that we would make. The first would be by Sven to talk about language is power. And then we'll turn the floor to Milena to talk about how to talk about blue justice. And I would close with talking about how to act on blue justice for small-scale fisheries. And then we will open the floor to very interactive and hopefully lively discussion. So feel free to write your question in the comment and the chat box as we go, but we're going to reserve all the questions and discussion at the end of the three presentations. Okay, so just a reminder to everyone, please do not turn your camera on, and please mute your mic, and note that the video is the webinar is being recorded. So I look forward to having the discussion with you after the presentations. For now, we'll turn the floor to Sven. Go ahead, please, Sven. Sven, your microphone is mute, and we don't see your screen yet.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, but we don't see your screen yet.
I must have done something here but I'm not sure what I did. So you can't see it now?
Not yet. Have you shared your screen? Have you put on your PowerPoint?
I have my PowerPoint out, but somehow I'm outside this. I can't bring it back. The screen where I do the sharing of the PowerPoint.
Would you like us to share the screen for you?
Yeah, that would be good.
Desna, can you help this?
Yes.
And you just have to let Vesna know when to move to the next slide.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Wonderful. Are you sharing it now?
In 2 seconds. Okay, for those who are just joining us, I just went through a bit of intro and letting people know that we would be 3 presentations in a row, and then we would have discussion afterwards. But in the meantime, if you would like to write any questions, please feel free to do that in the chat box. And I will ask that everybody turn off their camera and then turn on the microphone, to mute your mic, and then we'll bring everybody back on the screen later. Sven, if you'd like to put your camera on, that would be nice.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it.
Well, don't worry about it, then let's start the talk.
Yeah, I start the talk, okay? Yes, during the World Congress, Small Fisheries Congress on fisheries research in Chiang Mai in 2018, the argument was that we need to start talking about how we should talk about small-scale fisheries during the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. Whether we have the concept we need in order to set the stage for such a conversation. The concept of blue justice was introduced, which has since been a focus of TBTI. This year is indeed the International Year for Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. And we do have something to show for ourselves, such as books and published papers about blue justice, which the three of us will present here today. My topic is language is power. For those of you who subscribe to the ICSF magazine Samudra, you would perhaps have noticed my paper on the same topic just before the end of the year. Some of what I'm going to say is drawn from that paper. Next slide, please. Which I hope you see here is a screenshot from that paper. And on the left-hand side, you would see the argument behind the argument that language is power, and why we should talk about language. The one, and I quote, the one who controls the language controls the conversation, and the one who controls the conversation controls the action. So maybe we therefore need to start to talk about language as a concept and how we talk about it. Blue justice must be seen in the context of the blue economy and blue growth. These concepts do not appear in the small-scale fisheries guidelines. The two concepts are more recent than the guidelines, but they are now all over the world. Globalization is truly also about the proliferation of language, about how concepts and perspectives travel the world, far and fast. I argue in the Samudra article that we need to talk about the justice for small-scale fisheries in the blue economy. The risk is that the concern of the all the concerns of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, like the marginalization of small-scale fisheries and all the negative things that follow from it, such as poverty, may become an even bigger problem in the blue economy if we do not pay attention to it. Also, how marginalization of the small-scale fisheries is happening in the way we talk about the blue economy. The next slide, please. Here you can see on the left a couple of statements. Without the blue justice concept, there is a bigger risk that small-scale fisheries get overrun in the blue economy language game, a game that they cannot afford to lose. Secondly, blue justice is a composite and complex concept, but it is also at the same it's also intuitive and at the same level of abstraction as the blue economy. So it's a concept that is easy to bring up in the context when blue economy is discussed. But we do have another reason for focusing or bringing the blue justice concept forward, and which is in the next slide, which shows the photo of Ludwig Wittgenstein, who you see here died in 1951 or 52. He is perhaps one of the finest philosophers that the world ever has seen. And here is a quote from one of his famous books. Concepts lead us to make investigations, are the expression of our interest, and direct our interest. In TBTI, we want the blue justice to inspire research, and we hope to have demonstrated that, and we have wanted to contribute to that with our own publication. We want it to become a topic for theoretical and empirical research. We want our colleagues to pay attention to what is happening to small-scale fisheries in the blue economy, and the attention is, of course, triggered and guided by language. But as I also said in the previous slide, blue justice is a composite concept. It refers to many aspects of justice, which academics have discussed for ages. But justice, or the lack of it, is also a living experience of small-scale fisheries people. For that, to capture that experience, we need concepts. We need analytical and abstract concepts, but we also want to have our conversation about blue justice to make sense outside the academic community. Then we need what Clifford Geertz, the renowned social anthropologist, called experience-near concepts, which is defined in his seminal article from 1972, and one quote is shown in the next slide. It says, people use experience-near concept spontaneously, unself-consciously, as it were, colloquially. They do not, except fleetingly and on occasion, recognize that there are any concept involved at all. This is what experience-near means, that ideas and the realities they disclose are naturally and indissolubly bound up together. This is from his paper, from the native's point of view on the nature of anthropological experience. I will talk a little bit more about Clifford Geertz in a little while. Blue justice is in itself experience distance as a concept, and would therefore only be a starting point for our explorations of small-scale fisheries in the blue economy. We need certainly other concepts that are closer to the reality and captures how people themselves understand their situations in the blue economy. And they, of course, as anyone else, use language to understand their situation, what they do, and what they experience. But how do we get to understand what people understand when we cannot be them? How can we understand what they really feel and what is happening to them and what they think about what is happening to them? Would you, as Clifford Geertz asked in his article, have to be a witch to understand what witchcraft is all about? Next slide, please. Studying this slide shows the two concepts, the experience near concept to the left, and experience distant concept to the right. And blue justice concepts would be on that gradient. The paper that we just published and which Milena is going to talk about is clearly a paper that are using experience distance concept. You know, fisheries people would not talk about hermeneutical justice as we do in that paper. They will, of course, use concept that is closer to their experience and to their reality, and they will have concepts which they need in order to function in their situation. Folk knowledge, as is a topic of social scientists, or local knowledge, is of course expressed through concepts, which is experience near. And here is what Clifford Geertz says about that problem that he discusses. How can you understand people when you cannot be them? How can you understand witchcraft when you cannot be a witch? And it's the sentence there that starts with, the ethnographer does not, and in my opinion, largely cannot perceive what informants perceive, what he perceives, and that uncertainly enough is what they perceive with, or by means of, or through, or whatever words they may choose. If you cannot, of course, be that person and understand what it really is to be a small-scale fisher, for instance, you can at least get an understanding of the concepts, the words, the language that the small-scale fishers would use themselves to capture or represent their reality. This is the argument. Studying blue justice for small-scale fisheries in this perspective, where language is power, would require not just an investigation in what is happening to small-scale fisheries, whether they in the blue economy lose access to resources and markets, whether their communities suffer, for instance. It would also involve research into how small-scale fisheries talk about their experience, what language, words, and concepts they would use to describe what they experience, what they feel, what they learn, and how how they would represent or conceptualize what they experience. If we cannot be the other person, we can at least succeed in understanding the concepts that they use, which is what Geertz says in this quote. The next slide, please. Well, this is the second article, and it is perhaps even more experience distance than the previous article, or it certainly is. And it's a very theoretical article where we try to conceptualize the concept of blue justice and how we should actually study it. The final slide draws from the article in Samudra, which I first presented. I introduced my talk with, and just want you to pay attention to what's in that window there. The blue justice concept requires a narrative founded in practical, lived experiences of those for whom injustice is part of their history and daily life. And that may be a justification and an introduction to what follows next, what Milena is going to say, and after her, Ratana. So that was what I want to tell you now, and I will, of course, be happy to discuss these issues and what I said afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sven, for that. Milena, you're next. So let's hear about how we should talk about blue justice. Again, if you have any questions for any of us, just please feel free to write that in the chat box. Go ahead, please, Milena.
Okay, I'll start sharing my screen if possible. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, in the right form. So you just
no,
see
it's not. Can you do it in a slide mode?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Ratana, for the opportunity to talk on this webinar, and happy World Day for everyone. Happy New Year of the small-scale fisheries as well. I hope you are enjoying this seminar, and I thank you for joining us today. The title of my presentation is The Power to Name, and it's inspired on one article that I was reading by the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, and he was interested in how subtle ways or hidden ways of power were transmitted through generations in order to maintain some certain social order. So I hope that at the end of the presentation you will understand why I put this name why I put this title to this presentation. I am Milena. I am a researcher at the School of Global Studies at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. This presentation is based on a recent paper that we published with Ratana and Sven this year. And so if you have any questions or want to read the paper or want to use it as a reference, it has been published in Marine Policy, and it's open access, so everyone can get access to it. Blue justice is a relatively new concept that was explained by Ratana many times and by Sven as well. In a few words, withstands or resists blue economy and blue growth strategies that do not include small-scale fisheries in the plans or policies for sustainable ocean development. And to resist these agendas and talk about blue justice, it is important to understand the many possible routes of injustice in the context of small-scale fisheries. And we will see in this presentation that there are many injustices, not just the ones coming from blue economy and blue growth. Justice or injustices have been conceptualized and analyzed by many scholars during many years. But in this case, we wanted to concentrate in one type of injustice called Epistemic Injustice, based on the book that Miranda Fricker, she's a philosopher, book wrote about this, and she says that epistemic injustice refers to a wrong done to someone in her capacity as a knower or transmitter of knowledge. So to understand this, she explains that there are two types of injustices. The one is called testimonial and the other one is hermeneutical injustice. And for the case for testimonial injustice, there are cases when people attribute more or less credibility to a statement of person based on some prejudice to the identity of this person. It could be social background, it could be race, it could be gender, or any ethnicity. And as an example, she talks about, she gives this example of an elderly woman talking to a doctor, but he doesn't really hear. She could be really in pain or explaining a new type of virus or anything, but he just thinks, oh, this old woman, just there is a prejudice against her because of her age, so he doesn't hear what she's saying. And the second case is hermeneutical injustice, where these are cases when someone's experiences are not well understood by themselves or by the others, because they are missing the concepts to try to capture them, these bad experiences. And again, it's more easy to understand these concepts with an example. And Miranda Fricker uses the example of the concept of sexual harassment. And she says that during the 50s, when women were suffering from this sexual harassment, they preferred to, instead of explaining what was happening to them because it was a bit embarrassing, they preferred just to quit their jobs. And we're talking with friends, but not really openly about what was happening to them. And it was until the concept sexual harassment was developed that women could talk about this, and this contributed hugely to avoid this kind of behavior and also to punish the perpetrators. And now everyone knows that it could be dangerous to act at work in these cases of sexual harassment. Okay, drawing on these concepts of epistemic justice, the goals of our research was to present an overview of the injustices in the context of small-scale fisheries and suggest those concepts that could be used, as in the case of sexual harassment, that could explain the experiences, the unjust experiences of small-scale fisheries. How we did it, we collected 20 case studies from the TVTI information system on small-scale fisheries. And this was part of a call to gather stories, an example of any kind of, it could be policies, initiatives, frameworks, any situation that created some type of injustice to small-scale fisheries. We read all these stories, and from these stories we selected key paragraphs that were representative of one topic or theme, and then we suggest a concept on how to call this this experience. Then we compile all these concepts and we put them in a glossary. And these are the list of the stories that we covered. It was 20 stories, as I said, that they were related to thousands of fishermen in 15 countries from Asia, Africa, Australia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We finally came up with, from the 20 stories, we came up with 13 concepts, sorry, that could be used to describe the injustices of the stories that we read. And I do not have time to go through all 13, but I pick up, for example, the first one for testimonial injustice. The sentence that we capture from one story was that the authorities also alluded that levies would stay as they were as a way to discourage uncontrolled fishing that might lead to the exploitation of resources. So there was any evidence that there's no evidence that fishermen, because they are fishermen, they are just supposed to overexploit the resources. There was no research about these fishermen, but just because they're fishermen, they are assumed to overexploit. And we call this experience ecological bullying. Another case is the last one. It's set in one of the stories told in 1999, when the national park was established, the residents of adjacent barangays were not consulted. Few meetings were held, mostly to inform of the Protected Area Management Board decisions. So this is, I think, people who study with small-scale fisheries is very used to this kind of, the fishermen were not really invited to the table of negotiations. They were just informed, and this is not very uncommon, and we call this experience participatory domination. The same for hermeneutical injustice. I can take the last one. For example, researchers found that deep sea fishing is declining due to large-scale fisheries occurring in spaces traditionally occupied by small-scale fisheries. So that was part of one story, and I think it's also very common to listen to any stories where oil industry or wind power industry are occupying spaces from small-scale fisheries. And we call this industrial pillaging. So at the end, we put all these concepts together in a glossary and explain these concepts. For example, fisher phobia, the attitudes or beliefs that small-scale fisheries people are inferior in relation to other fishers or social groups. Industrial pillaging, the acts by large-scale, massive, profit-efficient industries or corporations of stealing something from a fishing community or a small-scale fishery. Recreational assault is the attitude or action or attitude that disadvantages small-scale fisheries as a result of recreational fisheries. So at the end of our research, we conclude that we found evidence that epistemic injustice is in two variants and has been, in its two variants, has been harming small-scale fisheries long before Fricker's book. That there is a need to provide new concepts to interpret social experiences in the context of small-scale fisheries. We suggested 13, but I'm sure there are much more. And that we need a new language. That language is important because, as Spain always was repeating to me, the one who controls the words we use are the ones who control the conversation. We need transdisciplinarity for cultivating practices, and this is Ratana who has been pushing us to apply transdisciplinarity. We need it for for actually listen with patients what people are experiencing, and trying to understand what is happening there and eliminate discrimination towards them. We also need research needed on if and how new concepts can enter discourses. It's not that we have these concepts in this paper and they will stay there. We need to find out some way to enter discourses of sustainable development. But following one of the, she's a feminist who reviewed Ficker's book, she wrote, "Knowing your enemy by the name is half the battle." That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, please write them in the chat or raise your hand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Milena, for that. So we started to see people putting questions in the chat, which is great. I think a couple of them are already been answered, I think, by Vesna, at least about the report. And then we can see other questions that perhaps my presentation would help cover a little bit, which is a question from Alu about the transdisciplinary research, which also you, Milena, had already touched on. So let me go through my presentation quickly, and then we will be able to have a chat afterwards. All right, so I hope you can see my screen. So I am basically going to talk about the second paper that is part of this presentation. This is something that has quite a long history, and Sven already mentioned some of these, but basically it is, there is an invitation basically from our colleague in University of Alberta, Christophe, who actually said that they're working on a concept called co-learning, and they're very intrigued by what we have been saying and doing with the interactive governance and in the context of blue justice. So they actually invited us to contribute. And that's what I want to focus on, but I want to start actually from the story behind this. You already heard earlier what Sven mentioned, that when we got together 4 years ago in Chiang Mai in Thailand, this concept of blue justice was presented by our colleague Modiba Isaacs, and it was very intriguing for many of us. At that time, blue economy and blue growth were have already been promoted. Many of us expressed a lot of concern about what would that mean? What does blue economy how it would play out and how it would affect small-scale fisheries. So basically, bringing in the concept of social justice and other many of the principles that we believe in that should be we should embrace when we talk about small-scale fisheries, got us to think a lot about what we need to do to really talk about social justice and social equity for small-scale fisheries as we're navigating blue growth and blue economy. So then, right after that, we decided that we'll make a commitment to the Ocean Conference, United Nations Ocean Conference, which is what many of us actually are doing the same thing. Many organizations make that kind of commitment. So we basically said we want to share stories and case studies that would illustrate how policies, decisions, and development agenda affect access and rights of small-scale fisheries and basically causing challenging social justice principles. But as we started to talk about this, we realized that it's not that easy to talk about blue justice, even though it is an intuitive concept. In some ways, we have to recognize that it is evolving and it can really be interpreted in many different ways. And the effort that Milena just presented basically is to make it, to ground it even more with the experience of the people. So when we put in this Wikipedia entry, the hope was actually to start growing our conversation and the discussion about blue justice and make it a bit more mainstream in terms of the discussion that we need to talk about. And then we decided that we would call for stories from us, basically researchers, practitioners, and community groups who are familiar with what's going on in small-scale fisheries. Maybe they are themselves experiencing social injustice in the way they practice small-scale fisheries in those locations. So we basically are saying that let's them tell the stories, and these stories we put in an ebook, and this is basically the information, the data that we did, we analyzed in the paper that Milena just presented. And you can access these with the link that Vesna just sent in the chat. We are also putting the information in the information system. So TBTI has developed this information system on small-scale fisheries. Now we would have something what we call Blue Justice Alert. Basically, it is a platform where we would want to demonstrate and illustrate and visualize how small-scale fisheries are affected by different causes of injustice. So that's, based on what I said earlier, there's so many types of injustice. And if we're going to use the language that the other paper presents, we can actually start to have better understanding about what's going on in communities. And then we can alert the global community about what's going on in a location. So this Blue Justice Alert is a new project that TBTI is working on, and we're going to, hopefully we'll be rolling it out eventually with the platform that we have been developing. But if you go into ISSF right now, you can already explore some of this data about small-scale fisheries, because one of the reasons for when people are feeling feeling unjust is sometimes due to the gap in the knowledge and the lack of appreciation of their knowledge. So our job, our effort has been to try to bring the awareness and the knowledge about small-scale fisheries and disseminate them in different formats as much as possible. So here again is the paper that we basically submitted by the invitation of Professor Van Asch at the University of Alberta. And we are linking this with the interactive governance, like I said, simply because this is basically when we talk about this in the context of the future we want. So the future we want basically is inviting states and non-state actors to contribute to achieving sustainable development goals. So all these SDGs. And there are many means, many mechanisms, many tools and approaches that governments and countries around the world are trying to promote. And this is what has been part of the Ocean Conference, which is the SDG 14. But if you talk about other groups, they would be looking to achieving all the 17 goals. Blue economy and blue growth, of course, has been developed in a context, in a sense, as part of this SDG and as an answer to SDG 14, which is focusing on conservation and sustainable use of resources. Here we have big space in the ocean that should allow everyone to be able to benefit from it through this lens of social, sustainable ocean economy. The conversation about blue justice and blue economy, of course, have in many instances sidelined the voice and the practices of small-scale fisheries. Normally they're not often engaged in the decision-making. Now they are further marginalized. When we went into looking at this paper, we basically are saying that we may be thinking of strong institutions and even just institutions, but that is not the only condition that would be required for small-scale fisheries to achieve justice. So we need to also look at what's happening in small-scale fisheries with the lens of the meta-order and the second order, which is the institution, and also the daily interactions. What's happening on the ground is very important, following what Amartya Sen talks about. So this is why we brought in this interactive governance and trying to illustrate this. So it's a little bit theoretical, as Wayne said, but at the same time, it has some grounding on some of the research that we have been doing and we draw on. So you to think about these in terms of, the connection between the voluntary guidelines for small-scale fisheries, which is the document, the very important principles that member states of FAO have endorsed and adopted in 2014. So it contains principles like human rights, social justice, gender equity. You can see that there are a lot of alignment between that with many of those SDG goals. What we are trying to do is to think about blue justice for small-scale fisheries as a way to really integrate and bridge these many concepts, going from trying to support the implementation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, but also trying to achieve many of those SDGs. But really, how to look at blue justice for small-scale fisheries is at the center of our effort. So you can imagine that the implementation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines would require interactive and transdisciplinary learning as an inherent aspect of building strong institutions. So we could, if we don't have this holistic and interactive and transdisciplinary lens, we would be missing out on things. And transdisciplinary lens, in this case, it's about engaging broadly with different types of knowledge and different knowledge holders. So not just the science, not just a scientist, and not just a particular type of science, but also fishing people, practitioners, and people who really are working closer to the sea, like people with the concept that Sven just mentioned, the experience near people. But we also would say that strong and just institutions alone are not sufficient to achieve social justice. We must continue to the first order, which is more at the daily interactions, simply because justice is ultimately connected with the way small-scale fisheries people live and interact with each other, and also with other stakeholders. So we wanted to make sure that those, whatever is important for small-scale fisheries, are well captured in the way we understand blue justice, so that they can really see themselves in the way we develop ocean plan and sustainable economy. We can also recognize that whatever matters to them would need to be protected. It would have to have priorities in the way we think and talk and govern the ocean space. So that is basically what we are trying to say in this paper. At the end, it is these small-scale fisheries people that are the majority of the users of this ocean space, and they make contribution to food security and all these many SDGs that we already talked about. So we brought in this concept of the three orders of justice to recognize that both the reasons or the causes of injustice and also opportunities or solutions can be found in three orders of governance. At the meta order are all about principles and values and images, things that are happening at a higher level, like justice principles. So we argue that we need to figure it out which justice principles are foundational for the governance system. If you look at the small-scale fisheries guidelines, we talk about human rights. Can that be part of those justice principles? Can Rawls' difference principles be part of that justice principles? Do they recognize or ignore the rights, the needs, and interests of small-scale fisheries when we start to promote certain principles? The second order, it's about getting the institutional right, getting the institutions right. And this is not just the body and the governing body alone, but it's a lot to do actually with the regulations and rules, including the legislation. So we wanted to ask questions like, what institutional characteristics does the governance system have? Are the rules supportive or discriminate against the small-scale fisheries? So those are very important questions that when we started to bring the principles to help design institutions, they can become just institutions if we put in just principles. But oftentimes we have many principles that are competing. We might even think about sustainability as a principle on its own, but in itself, there's a lot of contradiction, there's a lot of priorities and competing interests that might actually create a situation that are not, that disadvantage small-scale fisheries. But then we have to bring that to the first order as well when we look at actions and interactions on the ground. This is where we can observe power relations on the daily basis. Patterns of interactions among stakeholders supportive or discriminate against small-scale fisheries. So those are really some of the guiding questions that we're presenting in this paper and also in the book that I will be presenting next. But this is basically to recognize that a lot of what's going on in these three orders of governance have what we call trickle up and trickle down dynamics. So they're never static, and we need to really continue to be iterative in our effort to understand what's going on. So this book should be released very soon. This is basically a book that contains about 30 case studies that people who, some of them have contributed to the ebook and then continue to elaborate on the case studies using these interactive, the three orders of governance to guide the analysis. Basically, we want this book to demonstrate that there are real risks that small-scale fisheries people face as state and governments around the world plan to implement the Sustainable Ocean Development Plans. There are human rights issues that are embedded into the governance principles and institutions that make a difference for small-scale fisheries in their daily life. So in stressing the importance of policies and institutions that build on the experiences of small-scale fisheries people in the context in which they operate, the book draws on case studies of small-scale fisheries from countries on all continents to clarify what blue justice entails for small-scale fisheries. And then we really want to talk about what then we need to do to make change. And this is a part about taking action on blue justice. One of the ways to think about this is actually around these justice statements. So you have now the terminology and glossary, but now we also have statements that we can make. And these statements are basically drawn from the 30 case studies, and they are basically what we use to section the book. So the book has 10 sections that contain case studies that illustrates what we are saying in these blue justice statements. So basically, we have to recognize, for instance, that justice issues have deep historical roots. They stem from old and new conflicts. The systemic and multidimensional. It's a lot of time, it's about territorial and spatial issue. There's also a lot about, justice is actually one of the principles that is competing in alternative livelihoods like tourism that we've seen. It's an eminent issue for inland fisheries that our colleagues working in inland fisheries really continue to remind us of that. And with COVID-19, we recognize that justice issues have been more evident, but not just that, because many of these locations already face environmental and disaster and climate risk. But we are really then continue to argue that justice is a priority condition for sustainable development, and it is about going beyond claims. And this is to recognize that many countries, many governments are making the claim that they're embracing justice and equity as principles, but they're not really doing that in their actions. And this is why it's important to look at the first order governance. And then finally, we're saying that justice needs also a strong knowledge foundation. This is why we continue to build and develop this concept together. And we're hoping that this webinar is another opportunity for us to work together to talk about what matters when it comes to small-scale fisheries in the context of blue justice. And now I would invite people with questions. Everyone want to turn on your camera, you can feel free to do that so that we can have a conversation. And I would now take time to look at the screen here to see if there are any questions, but really feel free to, many of you have who are participating have contributed either to the ebook and also to the new Springer book. So if you have any feedback in terms of how you feel about, do you find this glossary that we presented in the first paper, and also this concept about the three orders of governance and the TD lens helpful in moving forward. Viviana, good to see you. I wonder if you'd like to say anything. Please go ahead, feel free to.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this rich discussion and for the great presentations. Very, very happy to see this moving on and this great discussion. No, I was just thinking that injustice is something that we really need to abolish, right? It's really killing a very important sector in fisheries with which we all work with. But I was wondering that maybe we should emphasize that in the case of fisher women, they face a double or third kind of injustice, right? And I was yesterday with the mollusk gatherers here in the Pacific coast of Costa Rica, and they were saying, well, it seems like the world never reaches down here. We are alone, right? Nobody remembers mollusk gatherers in this country. So I just wanted to maybe mention that and share with you that there's hopefully a long discussion this year on this issue, which is one of the first I think we should approach. But thank you very much, Ratana, and everyone for this great discussion.
Thank you, Viviana. This is a very important point, of course, because even among small-scale fisheries, not everyone is the same, right? So there are some people, some certain groups that are more vulnerable, more marginalized, and are at a disadvantage. And indeed, a lot of work that, Viviana and many others have been doing, that has been doing, actually are helping to really first review the situation and then working on addressing them. And I know that people like, I don't know whether Alice Ferrer is still here or not, but you talk a lot about that as well in the context of the Philippines. But yes, a lot of people are doing that. I'm not sure whether you would like to have anything to say or not, but we know that in the audience, we have one of our authors, Jemima, who would like to say something as well. So again, please feel free to turn on your camera. And Milena, we want to also bring you back as well to help answer some of the questions. Go ahead, please. Aliu, if you want to say something, or Jemima.
Okay. Hello, Ratana. Hello, everyone. It's been a wonderful discussion, and all the points raised are very important. Truly, we need to look at justice from all the angles and all orders, because there's a lot of interplay between government agencies, the fishers, and even between the fishers, among the fishers when it comes to social justice. So it's important for us to look at all these angles towards better fisheries management, right? So that people don't feel marginalized. Last week, I was at one of the landing beaches, and a fisherman was saying that they knew it was bad to fish with light as a fish attracting device. But because if they didn't use light, all the other fishermen were going to use light anyway. So then they are all forced to use light because they don't want to feel left out. So some of these conversations are very, very important. And thank you so much.
Thank you. So your chapter that you contributed to us also is very revealing in terms of what's going on. So thanks for sharing that. Would you like to say something?
Okay. First of all, I want really to thank you a lot for this presentation, because I learned a lot, and it will be very useful, for our our contribution, because we are willing with throughout the too big to ignore up here in Senegal to contribute, with a book that will focus on these this contradiction, between how, for example, blue economy is really, questioning, blue justice in terms of rights, people have, because in our countries, people used to, to confuse, law and rights, law in singular and rights in plural, here, this is I think, we have already, in our situational analysis, that is in the process, with how we say, with V2V, address, a couple of, rights, it's something like transversal, it's about, all these questions, raised in the small scale fishery guidelines. How, for example, it's now a question of implementation, but not, we have, many recommendations. In this document, we have already, I have with my co-authors, raised, a couple of, problems, all related to blue justice. So I had only one question today that I communicate to you. The other thing, for example, that is very important for me is that because most fisheries are still, marginalized, that means, even those who are engaged in this sector are also marginalized. But because who is really, who are the how you say, the main scientists profile, of scientists that are engaged in small scale fisheries? The large majority as people coming from social sciences, or human sciences. So I think it's we need really, alliance, maybe even sometimes, beyond even this sector, the small scale fisheries sector. That's the reason why I think in order to make this blue justice concept, evolve to a reality, it's very important to fulfill two things. The first thing is every time try to keep in mind or to make a connection with, for example, the Universal Declaration of how you say, the Declaration des Droits of Human Rights. It's very important, and have a connection also with how we say, the Human Rights Watch is some organizations, because as far as we stay in a kind of ghetto like that, because we are marginalized. When I say we, stakeholders and even people who are really, making, all this lobbying, this plaidoyer for. So it's very important to be open. That's why I wanted it's more a suggestion, for future. Otherwise, I have anything to add, and thanks a lot to the three presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Now that's a good point about reaching out to others. And this is why I never want us to talk about SDG 14 alone, right? That's why we also need to talk about others as well. Jose, you also have a point that you put in the chat. So we're gonna let people say whatever they want to say now, and then we're gonna try to get some answer questions going. Okay. So Jose, go ahead, please. Good to see you.
Nice to see you all again. Well, I think that the presentation have been very interesting. I am going to put to good use some of these contents of some of these concepts soon, because we are currently I'm trying to help with some colleagues to help to the Regional Federation of Fisher Organization in the Canary Islands to respond to a proposal of several NPAs in the Canary Islands. And in this proposal is surprising, but they are trying to ban or to make more difficult the use of many traditional fishing gears that are not. There is no scientific justification to limit these gears, but they try to use some kind of vague ideas about the danger of these traditional gears. To ban them or to make more difficult to use this year. So I think some of these concepts are very useful. The eco-bullying is a very interesting concept for naming this attitude that is so strange to us somehow. So thank you for the concept development.
Thank you for sharing that. We actually had a lot of fun coming up with these terms, and we actually were not sure how that would be received, but glad you like it. Emiko actually put a nice note on the chat, but he just left the meeting for another meeting now. But there's a bit of a question on that. I'll go to that later. Well, Christina, are you still here? Christina Spell?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to just either ask your question or say something?
Yes, I can't put on my camera now, but thank you so very much for this very interesting and inspiring seminar. The thing I had after Milena's presentation and also in connection to what Jose just said about the glossary and the contexts, and I wonder if the dictionary would look differently depending on where and in which geographical context you would gather the material, the empirical material. Would it be like a different glossary, a different dictionary if you would look like more north on the globe, or the south, or the middle, you know? Do you at all understand my question?
Yeah. No, that's a really important question. Thank you. Milena, what do you think?
Yes and no. Some of the topics I think we saw that repeat in many cases, not everywhere, but some of them are, I was thinking I could use them in North America and Asia, but then thinking about North, maybe we need something special for the seals. In the case of Finland and Sweden, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have to say the most difficult part of this research project was to find the names, the concepts. And I am not, my English is not my mother tongue, so even then I am reduced in the availability of words too. So maybe it's easier if you do it in Finnish or in Swedish, that you find the real word connection to try to, in one concept, Christina, okay, now it's tough for you. Explain the problem of the seals with the fishermen. It is tough, it's not so easy.
No, I do realize the challenge here. Yeah. But perhaps you and me, we could spin on this a little bit after this seminar and see if we can come up for something for the Baltic Sea and the you know, the Scandinavian context. Yeah, a sub how do you say, sub part of the dictionary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the point about this is never, I mean, it's supposed to be a growing, or right? It is kind of iterative as well in the process. This is why we kind of have to still test it and how it works. And I think it's a good point that it might vary depending on the context. It might vary depending on the context and the geography as well. Sven, do you want to add something to this? Microphone, please, Sven.
Yeah. Concepts are means through which we recognize what we experience. You know, I think it is helpful. It's indeed empowering when you can see what I experience. There is a name out there for what I'm experiencing here. Now I can talk about it in ways that I couldn't talk before, and I can talk about it, my experience, with people who don't know my experience. This is what concepts do, and I think there is many languages around the world that we are able to translate still and understand, speak across languages, and there are broader categories and subcategories. I think we can build a glossary that would work regardless of context. We do need to, I think, take, that was Vivian's original point about, she told the story about this woman who she said talk to. Injustice is that I try to argue a living experience. We discuss principles at a very abstract philosophical level, and then we discuss institutions and how to build law, in order to correct for injustice. So, but we need to listen to those stories, what people say about their experience and how they conceptualize their own experience, and that is, of course, something to build on, which means that we are able to, and this is what we would hope, that such a glossary might help, that you can have a conversations between academics on the one hand, or among stakeholders that are supposed to be involved in co-management of it. They need to talk to each other, and they need to talk to each other in ways that they can understand. They must use words that make sense to them. And that means that you cannot only operate on this very abstract level. Can you find a language that bridges those different conversations that people have locally and with policymakers and other, you need language to do that. You cannot govern without language. Where governance is totally language dependent, and therefore we have to pay attention to this issue and themselves would talk about it. I'm hopeful that the concept of blue justice, once it is out there and we continue using it, it will be natural to bring it in, talk about it as easily as we talk about the blue economy. In fact, that any discussion or any conversation on blue economy would emphasize the justice aspects of the blue economy, and we need a concept for that. Blue justice, I hope, would make it so that anyone who speaks about the blue economy would also have to ask the questions about blue justice. And if that, we can be hopeful that this will be the case, but we need to be part of what Wittgenstein called the language game of the blue economy. We need to be part of that conversation with concepts that captures what small-scale fisheries our experience, not just in political fora, but in their own communities. And that's sort of the effort. That's what we try to do. And Aliu asked how do we do that? I think sometimes we need to lead by experience, lead by demonstration. We have to demonstrate that this actually works. Also in research, and writing papers about this is one way to at least to start it.
That's great, Sven. We actually have difficulty hearing you. I'm not sure whether it's your microphone or the line, or you're moving some of the line too much. But anyway, I think your answer. I have a
very old headset. It's all broken. Sorry about that.
That's okay, but it's unfortunate because we can hardly hear you. So don't move too much when you in the next time. What you were saying actually addresses a little bit the point that Patrick just mentioned in the chat. Patrick, would you like to just show up on the screen and say a few words about what you just wrote in the chat?
Thanks, Ratna. Hello all. My internet connection tends to be unstable. So briefly, it was just a concern from experience that in some cases, and I am referencing the Caribbean, there is a prevailing narrative of the harm and danger of blue economy. I think sometimes a little bit uncritical and without looking at the nuances of blue justice, and folks who are intending to be genuinely helpful and finding opportunities to include small-scale fisheries are sometimes coming up against constraints. This is not new in fisheries, but I wondered if this was also experienced elsewhere, and something for which academics and researchers like us who are intending to be helpful should be more aware. Over.
Great point. Sven, Milena?
Milena?
Well, yeah, there could be. Of course, if you hear from fishermen that their experiences do not have name, then they should have name, despite how do you see the process in a bigger process, I think. And not if this blue economy or experiences are not seen or perceived as injustices to the fisheries people, of course we have to respect that, and then there's no need to put a name of anything. It's just when you are sure that there is some injustice because they are marginalized, they don't have these concepts, they are not put there. Yeah, that will be my guidance on how to work with this.
I think Patrick is okay. It's right to saying that we must not we must emphasize that the blue economy does not necessarily or always have to be bad for small-scale fisheries if it's done right. You know, if, for instance, the justice issues are part of what it does, but you cannot if the blue economy further marginalizes small-scale fisheries, and that can be shown through empirical research, you cannot argue that this is not blue justice. You know, this is not the blue economy. That is what it does. It is part of blue. In many cases, that is the case, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. And I think we have been careful in what we have been writing in papers and in the book to say that, you know, there are certain risks that you need to be aware of, and to minimize that risk. And that is the point by, you know, here today, to minimize that risk. Small-scale fisheries people have to be part of the conversation, and to be part of the conversation, they need to have a language that make it possible for them to express what they experience and how things can be improved. And that is a way of empowering them. And this is what social scientists often, what we try to do, empower people to provide them with a more precise language, a language that represents what they feel. That's that's what we do. And there are so many examples that by providing people with new, better, more precise concept, it has indeed changed their situation, improving their, you know, and they have to therefore have a defense mechanism in the conversation we have and need to have about small-scale fisheries in the blue economy, a language defense mechanism, you can argue, so that they can withstand the more eloquent, polished speech that other stakeholders have, for instance, due to their education or the kind of culture they come from, institutions they come from. So this is sort of the concern. Yeah.
And I would just add quickly that we actually, with the similar thinking that you mentioned, Patrick, this is the reason actually why the new book is titled Blue Justice small-scale fisheries in a sustainable ocean economy. So basically, we don't want this to be that because of blue justice concept, they can be excluded. If they were to be excluded because of blue economy, we definitely wanted to rectify that. But it is more about how to bring in the conversation so that this would not happen. And of course, having the language would help, having a better understanding about how justice takes place and where to, what we need to do in order to address them is actually could help move the conversation forward. So thank you for that. And we have about just about less than 10 minutes left in this seminar. So last chance, yes, go ahead, Vivian, please.
Yes, thank you. Just to add to this interesting discussion, I think Patrick is right that not necessarily blue economy is bad, as a monster that we see it, coming. But one of the things that we are seeing is that this strong emphasis on economic aspects of the use of the marine resources brings in very strong stakeholders to the territories and new stakeholders sometimes interest in this economic line. And then this, talking about concepts, this need of differentiating stakeholders from right holders becomes even bigger, even stronger. And if these right holders, indigenous communities, local communities, do not have their rights secured, then these stakeholders take over very strongly. And I think we do need to be very critical of the blue economy, not even concept, putting it into practice in the territories, because we have not been good in really ensuring the rights of these right holders. And I think that must be one key issue that has been discussed here, how this rights-based approach needs to be at the center of the development in this territory. So it is a key issue. We do need to be truthful with the other concepts. Economy is an issue, a market issue, very important for small scale fisheries, but we need to also look at social and cultural and blah, blah, all the diversity of other issues that need to be there in those territories. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we have a note here from Madeline. I'm not sure whether you wanted to just say something quickly, because it's been a while since we last saw you. Hi.
Hi, I'm not really set up properly to be seen on camera, but I did just want to say how this resonates with me, even though I'm working more with larger scale fisheries and but I did have the experience of the small scale fisheries when I did work in Senegal. And that's why earlier I mentioned that the idea of the mollusk gatherers having being ignored, essentially, that was true in Senegal for sure. So that was really fascinating. But I just wanted to congratulate you all on really coming up with some very important concepts. And I think they'll be valuable no matter what the scale of fisheries. If you think about even the scale of fisheries in the Northeast United States, which is not, by and large, it's not small scale, although I would say the lobster fishermen, there are some small scale fishermen. But in any case, I think it's really important to realize that these same people have justice issues when compared to the even larger scale and real economically powerful businesses and government issues and regulatory issues and so on. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I think the blue economy proponents and advocates, at least in my part of the world, they get the idea of the importance of involving people. Co-management is not any longer a very alien concept, and they have to a large extent adopted the same kind of language themselves, and they do agree with the idea that you have to involve stakeholders. So should we then be happy? Yeah, of course we should be happy. But imagine how that kind of conversation would work in those platforms if you, on the one hand, have very highly educated, eloquent people who have all the degrees, and now how to talk about issues to defend their, how to talk about their interests and issues. And on the other hand, you have people who are not that educated, not that informed, do not have the language on their side, do not have the concepts they need to actually represent their experience. What kind of participatory democracy would that be? You know, that's what this is about. You know, try to empower people through providing them with concepts that capture their situation in a way that sort of empowers them, you know, make it possible for them to actually, you know, to level the playing field in a way. This is that requires language on those that are not trained in the talk of that is now dominating the whole environmental discussion.
So our next task really is to test whether these concepts really work for small-scale fisheries people and the communities, and whether there could be, you know, a few iterations of this in the future. That would be great, and then we might be able to achieve what Patrick said in the chat here, the blue balance, right? Which is considering, acknowledging all these different trade-offs and etc. And you know, the economic, the question about the economies, of course, is very important, and we need to, just like Alu said, it's you know, how to really. People would use the term trade-off also, right? To trade between economic growth and whatever, you know. Some people say that we need to sacrifice certain things, or we need to put priorities and stuff. Those are all required important considerations and conversation. But I guess our effort here is just exactly what Sven said, to make it possible for people to engage in those discussions and the conversation, so that there are, you know, the starting point is not the same already, right? People don't feel empowered because it's a concept, a language that they're not familiar with, and they don't feel like they can engage properly. So we hope that these kind of terms, that the names and etc., could help people engage better, and also feeling a little bit of empowerment in the discussion. Okay, it's actually time to say goodbye, and I just wanted to make sure that if there's any last point that Sven and Milena like to say quickly to the web here before we close, that would be great.
Which one?
Would you like to, you have anything to say at the end? Would you like to closing remark quickly?
Well, it has been great to be part of this, and I found it interesting myself. And sometimes I find it even interesting to listen to myself, because I haven't necessarily prepared everything I would say, so it just pops out just because other people are saying something interesting. So I think this has been a good discussion about things that are indeed important. You mentioned sacrifices. Of course, you need to be there are things that needs to be sacrificed, but there are something that you do not sacrifice, and that is justice, and that's human rights, and all those basic things that are on a different scale than these economic growth and many of these sustainability indicators that you don't negotiate.
Yeah.
So you don't sacrifice. It's not part of that balance that you're searching. They're absolute.
Something we can trade, some things we just don't, right? Okay, Milena?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to recall that this is not the end of this work, that we need to produce much more of these concepts, and then we have to try to upscale them, to bring them to other spheres, try to publish as much as we can, use the concepts so that they come available to other people, and if anyone can help us with this, then yeah. We need your help.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Well, the audience, you have been great. Thank you so much for participating actively and for providing feedback to us. And of course, we will do our best to continue with the conversation in a balanced way. And just like Patrick suggested, maybe the next webinar should be the fisher folks' perspective, those with the experience near. And let's see what they say. Anyway, for us now, I'm going to leave you with the Justice song, because it didn't play quite well at the start. So enjoy that, and we'll be seeing you again. So happy World Day of Social Justice, and also happy International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. And we'll see you this year in 5 locations around the world to celebrate small-scale fisheries. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye-bye.
I was born by the sea, just a fisher folk and me. Easy lives were never seen, and with justice just a dream. Big guys fished the waters bare, and the tourists came to stare at the little boats I share, and with justice just a prayer. All the seas under the sun are enough for everyone if the big bad boats are gone and with justice living on. I am singing just to plead for the fisher folk who need to fish on but not for greed, and with justice guaranteed, and with justice guaranteed, and with justice guaranteed.